She was not born with a crown. She did not come with armies or gold. She was an orphan, raised far from home, under the shadow of a foreign king. Yet she was chosen not by chance, not by looks alone, but by a quiet purpose that moved behind palace doors. While rulers drank from gold cups and officials whispered in secret halls, a different kind of fight began. Not with swords, not with chariots, but with fasting, with faith, and with the courage to speak when silence could mean death. Her name was Esther, and this is more than a story of a queen. This is the story of how God saved a people through the most unlikely of heroes. In the days of King Xerxes, the emperor who ruled from India to Ethiopia, power stretched like a river across the world. From his throne in Susa, he gave orders, and men obeyed. To show his greatness, he held a long feast for nobles, princes, and military leaders. Gold sparkled, wine flowed, music never stopped. When that grand show ended, the gates opened to the city. For 7 days the gardens were full. Everyone was welcome. Everyone drank without limit. Inside the women's palace, Queen Vashti held her own feast. But on the 7th day, when the king's heart was warm with wine, pride pushed him to make a public demand. "Bring Vashti," he said, "wearing her royal crown. Let all see her beauty." Vashti said no. She would not stand before a drunken crowd to be stared at like a trophy. The king felt the cut of that refusal. Pride is thin skin stretched tight. His advisors warned, if the queen disobeys, other women will follow. Respect will fall. So a royal order went out. Vashti was removed. And across the empire, a message was sent in every language that men should rule their homes. No one saw it yet, but a larger hand was moving. Time passed. The king's anger cooled, and the empty place beside him stayed empty. His advisors said, "Gather young women from every province. Prepare them. Let the king choose a new queen." Messengers ran. Doors opened. Daughters were taken from villages and palaces alike. Among them was a young woman named Hadassah, called Esther in Persian. She was Jewish. She had been raised by her cousin Mordecai after her parents died. He had taught her wisdom, taught her to fear God, and told her to hide her background in this foreign land. Esther was brought to the palace and placed under Haggai, keeper of the women. She did not demand the finest perfumes or the loudest jewels. She carried herself with calm and grace. People noticed. Haggai noticed most of all. He gave her favor and good care. For 12 months, the women were prepared for one night with the king. When Esther's turn came, she took only what was needed. She walked in with quiet dignity. When the king saw her, his heart leaned toward her. He loved Esther more than any other. He placed the royal crown on her head, and the city cheered. A feast was held. Gifts were sent. A holiday was declared. But no one knew she was a Jew. No one knew God had placed his servant in the palace, not to be served, but to stand in the gap. Esther still listened to Mordecai. He spent his days at the king's gate, where officials moved and orders were posted. He had no high title, but he had clear eyes. One day he heard 2 guards, Bigthan and Teresh, plotting to kill the king. Mordecai sent word to Esther. Esther told the king, naming Mordecai as the source. An investigation proved it true. The guards were executed. The story was written in the royal record, Mordecai's name in ink, but no reward followed. Silence. No robe, no gold, no parade, only a line in a book. Later, the king promoted Haman the Agagite above all officials. Everyone bowed to Haman, everyone but Mordecai. Mordecai would not bend. Haman noticed. His anger grew like fire in dry grass. When he learned Mordecai was a Jew, hate spread in his heart. He wanted more than revenge on one man. He wanted all Jews gone from the capital to the edges of the empire. He cast lots, called Pur, to choose a date. He went to the king with careful words. "There is a people scattered in your lands," he said. "Their laws are different. They do not follow yours. It is not good for you to keep them." The king gave Haman his signet ring, the power to seal a law. A decree was sent out. On the 13th day of the 12th month, all Jews, young and old, men and women, were to be destroyed. Couriers rode, wax seals broke. In city after city, the words were read. Fear fell. Susa was confused. Across the empire, the Jews mourned. They fasted. They cried to God. Mordecai tore his clothes and put on rough sackcloth with ashes. He stood in the streets and wept openly. When Esther heard, she sent a servant to ask what had happened. Mordecai sent back a copy of the decree. He begged her to go to the king and plead for her people. Esther sent word, "All know the law. If anyone goes to the king without being called, that person dies unless the king lifts the golden scepter. I have not been called for 30 days." Mordecai's answer cut through fear. "Do not think you will be safe in the palace. If you are silent now, help will rise from somewhere else, but you and your father's house will fall. And who knows, perhaps you came to the kingdom for such a time as this." Something in Esther stood up. She sent back her reply. "Go, gather the Jews in Susa. Fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my servants will fast too. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. If I perish, I perish." On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robe. She walked into the inner court and stood where the king could see her. Time slowed. The room held its breath. The king looked up, then smiled, and reached out the golden scepter. Esther stepped forward and touched the tip. "What is your request, Queen Esther?" he asked. "Even up to half the kingdom, it will be given." Esther did not rush. She watched for the right moment. "If it pleases the king," she said softly, "come today to a banquet I have prepared for you and for Haman." The king agreed at once. Haman came too. They ate, they drank. The king asked again, "What is your request?" Esther said, "Please come again tomorrow. Then I will tell you." That night, a strange thing happened. The king could not sleep. He asked for the royal records to be read to him. A servant opened the book and read the tale of Mordecai, the plot he uncovered, the life he saved, the loyalty he showed. "What was done for him?" the king asked. "Nothing," the servant said. The king frowned. In that pause, the door opened. Haman had come early to ask permission to hang Mordecai on a gallows he had built. Before Haman could speak, the king spoke. "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Haman thought, "Who would the king want to honor more than me?" So he said, "Let him be dressed in the king's robe. Place a royal crown on his head. Set him on the king's horse. Let a noble leader walk before him, shouting, 'This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor.'" "Good," said the king. "Do all of that for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the gate. Do not leave out a single thing." Haman's pride fell like a stone. He walked before Mordecai through the streets, voice forced, eyes low, shouting the honor he wanted for himself. When it was over, Mordecai returned to the gate. Haman went home in grief. His advisors and his wife warned him, "If Mordecai is a Jew, you cannot stand against him. You will fall." The next day, at Esther's second banquet, the king and Haman reclined beside the queen. Again the king asked, "What is your request?" "Up to half the kingdom." Esther took a breath. The time had come. "If I have found favor," she said, "grant me my life and the life of my people. This is my request. For we have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and wiped out. If we had only been sold as slaves, I would have kept silent. But this evil is too great." The king's face changed. "Who is he? Where is the one who dared to do this?" Esther pointed across the table. The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." The room tilted. The king stood in fury and stepped into the garden to calm himself. Haman fell toward Esther, begging for his life. At that moment, the king returned and saw Haman fallen on the couch where the queen sat. "Will he even attack the queen while I am in the house?" he cried. Guards covered Haman's face. A servant said, "There is a gallows at Haman's house, the one built for Mordecai. Hang him on it," the king ordered. Haman was taken away and hanged on the very gallows he prepared for another. The wicked plan turned back on the wicked man, sudden and complete. The king gave Haman's estate to Esther. She placed Mordecai over it. Then the king took off his signet ring, the one that had sealed death, and gave it to Mordecai to seal life. But the danger was not finished. The first decree could not be canceled. A law sealed by the king's ring could not be undone, not even by the king. The enemies of the Jews still held a legal day of violence in their hands. So Esther went again to the king. She fell at his feet, wept, and pleaded for her people. The king held out the scepter. She rose and spoke. "Let an order be written to cancel the plans of Haman, the enemy of the Jews." The king gave permission. Mordecai called the scribes. In the king's name, a new decree was written and sealed. It said the Jews in every city had the right to defend themselves. They could gather to protect their lives and strike anyone who attacked them. The order went out in every language, to every province, by swift horses. As the new decree spread, fear turned to hope. In place after place, sorrow became light. Mordecai left the king's presence dressed in royal blue and white, wearing a great crown of gold and a fine purple robe. The city of Susa shouted for joy. For the Jews, there was light, gladness, and honor. Many people in the empire respected them, and some even joined them, because the fear of God's hand was clear. On the appointed day, when enemies rose to harm the Jews stood together. Governors and officials helped them, because Mordecai was now powerful in the palace, and his fame had spread. In the capital and across the provinces, those who had hoped for Jewish blood were defeated. In Susa, Haman's 10 sons were struck down, later hung at Esther's request as a sign that the evil line had ended. Esther also asked the king for one more day of defense in Susa, and he granted it. Across the empire, the Jews took no plunder. This was not greed. This was survival. This was justice. When the fighting ended, there was rest. What had been a date marked for death became a day of joy. The people made it a yearly celebration. They called it Purim, after the lots Haman had cast, which God overturned. Each year on the 14th and 15th days of Adar, they would feast, rejoice, send gifts to one another, and give to the poor. Sorrow to celebration, darkness to light. What was meant to destroy them became the very sign of their deliverance. Mordecai rose to second place in the empire, honored by many for the good he did. But it was not rank that made him great, it was his heart. He worked for the welfare of his people. He spoke peace and truth. And though the name of God is never written in the book of Esther, his fingerprints are everywhere. In the timing, in the turns, in the sleepless night, in the scepter lifted, in the table where truth was finally spoken. God was not silent. God was not absent. This story still speaks. It tells us that position is not accident. It tells us that quiet courage can shift the future. It tells us that even in exile, God sets people in places for such a time as this. It tells us that when fear says, "Be quiet," faith whispers, "Speak." It tells us that when evil seems to write the last line, God picks up the pen. Maybe you feel hidden. Maybe you feel small. Maybe you think your voice will not matter, that the room is too large and the rulers sit too high. But the same God who placed Esther in a palace can place you where you are needed at a gate, in a meeting, beside a friend, in a moment that seems ordinary until it turns the world. Your fasting, your prayer, your choice to stand and speak, these are not small things. They are the tools of heaven in human hands. Remember Esther's words, "If I perish, I perish." Not a cry of despair, but a step of faith. And see how God met that step not with death, but with deliverance. So hold this close. When you cannot see God's name, watch for His work. When doors feel heavy, ask for the scepter of grace. When the decree looks final, believe for the second letter, the one that turns fear into hope. When an enemy builds a gallows, trust the judge who turns plans around. The story of Esther is not only about a queen, it is about a faithful God who protects His people, even when He seems hidden. It is about the power of a single brave voice. It is about the great reversal, where grief becomes joy and mourning becomes celebration. And perhaps you too are standing where you are for this time. Not by accident, not unseen, but chosen, positioned, called. The God who reversed the fate of a nation still writes stories of redemption today. Yours could be next. Step forward, touch the scepter, speak, and watch what God will do